The night was quiet. Too quiet for a man whose world had already fallen apart twice. Mark Turner sat in his dimly lit living room, the hum of the refrigerator the only sign of life in his small suburban home just outside Vancouver. 2 months ago, this place had been filled with laughter. His son Ethan's giggles, his wife Laura's soft singing while cooking dinner. Now it was just echoes and silence. He still wasn't used to the quiet. He still reached for a second coffee mug every morning. When the doorbell rang that evening, Mark thought it was his neighbor again, dropping off another sympathy casserole. But when he opened the door, his heart nearly stopped. Standing there, framed by the golden porch light, was someone he hadn't seen since the divorce, Laura's younger sister, Claire. Her eyes were red from crying, and she wore a long white coat, the color of peace and storms both. Mark's breath caught.
"Claire, what are you doing here?"
What she said next would change everything. "Mark, we need to talk." Claire's voice trembled, the cold air clouding between them. Behind her, a taxi waited with its headlights cutting through the fog. Mark hesitated, unsure whether to let her in. He hadn't spoken to anyone from Laura's family since the divorce. He didn't want the pity. He didn't want the judgment. But something in Claire's eyes, a mix of fear and determination, made him step aside. Inside, the faint smell of coffee and baby shampoo lingered. Ethan, his 6-year-old son, was asleep on the couch under a blanket, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Claire's gaze softened at the sight. "He's grown so much," she whispered. Mark folded his arms. "Yeah, he's the reason I keep going." Claire took a deep breath and said, "Laura's in trouble." The words dropped like ice water. Mark's face went pale. He hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in weeks. "What do you mean, trouble?" Claire's voice cracked. "She's sick, Mark. She's been hiding it from everyone. From me, from you. She didn't want anyone to know until it got worse." Mark sank into a chair, his head spinning. "You're saying she's dying?" Claire nodded, tears spilling. "She asked me to come to you. She needs to see Ethan. She wants to make things right before it's too late." For a long time, Mark didn't speak. His mind flashed through memories, the fights, the slammed doors, the final papers he'd signed through gritted teeth. But beneath the bitterness was something else. The woman who once loved him, who'd shared dreams of a family, who'd smiled when Ethan was born. He rubbed his face. After everything she did, walking away, leaving us, she wants to see him now? Claire nodded, guilt heavy in her eyes. "She regrets everything, Mark. The affair, the divorce, the way she handled it all. She's scared, and she doesn't want Ethan to grow up hating her." Mark stared at the floor. He'd spent 2 months trying to erase Laura's ghost from every corner of this house, but now it felt like she'd never really left. "Where is she?" he asked finally. "In Toronto, at a hospice clinic. The doctors say she has maybe 2 weeks." Claire's voice broke, and Mark closed his eyes. The anger that had fueled him for months suddenly felt meaningless. "I'll take Ethan tomorrow," he said quietly. "But I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing it for my son." Claire nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. That's all she hoped for. The drive to Toronto was long and quiet. Snow fell in soft waves across the highway, painting everything in white silence. Ethan played with his toy cars in the back seat, unaware of the storm waiting at the end of the road. Mark glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his mother's eyes, his father's stubborn jaw. "We're going to see Mommy," he said gently. Ethan smiled, not knowing what seeing really meant. At the hospice, the air smelled of antiseptic and lilies. Claire led the way, her steps hesitant. When Mark entered Laura's room, time seemed to fold. She looked smaller, her face pale and thin, but her eyes still carried that soft spark that once drew him in. "Mark," she whispered, a weak smile flickering. "You came." He wanted to say something cruel, something that matched the pain she'd caused. But all that came out was a quiet, "Yeah." Ethan rushed forward. "Mommy!" Laura's tears came instantly as she pulled him close. For the first time in months, Mark didn't feel anger, just sorrow, deep and raw. Over the next few days, Mark and Ethan visited daily. At first it was awkward, small talk, polite nods, unspoken wounds filling the air. But as Laura told stories and laughed weekly with Ethan, something began to shift. Mark saw the woman he'd fallen in love with again, not the one who left, but the one who dreamed with him once. One night, after putting Ethan to bed in a nearby hotel, Mark returned to the hospice. Laura was awake, staring at the snow outside her window. "You were always good with him," she said softly. "I should have been better." Mark leaned against the wall. "You made mistakes. So did I." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "I never stopped loving you, Mark. I was just lost." For the first time, he didn't look away. "You hurt us, Laura. But I can't hate you anymore." Days turned into a week. Mark found himself helping with her meals, adjusting her pillow, even making her laugh once. Claire noticed the change, her heart quietly breaking in the background. She had always loved her sister, but she also carried her own secret, one she hadn't told Mark yet. That evening, after Laura fell asleep, Claire stood outside with Mark under the snow. "You've been incredible," she said.
I didn't think you'd forgive her.
Mark exhaled.
I didn't think I could. But forgiveness isn't for her. It's for me.
Claire's eyes shimmered in the moonlight.
"There's something else I need to tell you,"
she said quietly.
"Laura wanted me to make sure you weren't alone after she's gone."
Mark frowned. "What do you mean?" But Claire didn't answer. Not yet. Laura passed away 3 weeks later. The morning she died, the city was blanketed in snow. Pure, endless white. Ethan drew a heart on her bedside tray before leaving, whispering, "I love you, Mommy." She smiled one last time, her hand resting over his. Mark stood silently, his chest hollow but strangely at peace. At the funeral, people wept, but Mark didn't shed a tear. His eyes were dry, not because he didn't feel, but because he had already let her go long before that day. Claire stood beside him, holding Ethan's hand. When it was over, she turned to him. "You don't have to face this alone." Mark looked at her, really looked, and realized how much strength she carried quietly beside him. Life after loss was a different kind of silence. Mark went back to work at his garage, fixing cars by day and helping Ethan with homework by night. Claire visited often, bringing dinner, picking Ethan up from school, helping with small things that made big differences. One evening, as they watched Ethan build a snow fort outside, Claire said softly, "You're doing amazing." Mark smiled faintly. "I'm trying." She hesitated, then whispered, "Laura would be proud." That name no longer hurt as much. "Maybe she would," he said. As weeks passed, something unspoken began to grow between them, something neither wanted to admit, afraid it might betray the past. But love, as Mark learned, doesn't always arrive where it's expected. It started with laughter. One evening, while baking cookies with Ethan, Claire accidentally dropped flour on Mark. He retaliated with a playful toss, and soon the kitchen looked like a winter storm. Ethan laughed so hard he nearly fell off the stool. For the first time since the divorce, their home felt warm again. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep, they sat by the fire. "You've brought light back into this house," Mark said quietly. Claire blushed. "Maybe it was already there. You just needed to see it." Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither looked away. But before either could speak, Claire stood abruptly.
"Good night, Mark."
Claire began spending more time at the house, helping Ethan with school, cooking dinner, repairing the life Laura had broken. But she carried guilt like a shadow. She had promised Laura she'd be there for them, but she hadn't expected her heart to get involved. One afternoon, she found an old photo of Laura and Mark on the counter. She stared at it for a long time, tears welling. When Mark entered, she quickly turned away. "You miss her too," he said softly. Claire nodded. "Every day. But I think she'd want you to be happy again." He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Maybe happiness isn't gone. Maybe it just changed shape." Spring melted the snow. With each passing week, Mark and Claire's bond deepened, unspoken, yet undeniable. Ethan adored her, often calling her Auntie Claire with innocent joy. One sunny afternoon, they went to a local park. Watching them play, Mark felt something shift inside him. That night, as Claire tucked Ethan in, he whispered, "Auntie Claire, do you love Daddy?" She froze. "Why do you ask that?" Ethan smiled sleepily. "Because you make him smile like Mommy used to." Her heart tightened. Later, when she told Mark, he chuckled softly. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said. But behind the laughter, his eyes held something deeper. One evening, while Mark fixed a leaky sink, Claire sat nearby, sketching. "You draw?" he asked. She smiled. "It helps me think." When she showed him the paper, his breath caught. It was a drawing of him and Ethan laughing together. "You have talent," he said quietly. She shrugged. "I just draw what I see." Their eyes met again, and something inside Mark broke open. "Claire," he began, his voice low, "you've done more for us than anyone. I don't know what I'd do without you." She smiled sadly. "Then don't find out." But love isn't simple when ghosts still linger. When Mark's ex-mother-in-law learned about Claire spending nights at his house, she exploded. "How dare you dishonor Laura's memory?" she shouted over the phone. The guilt hit Claire like a wave. That night, she packed her things silently. When Mark found her by the door, suitcase in hand, his heart dropped. "You're leaving?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "It's too soon, Mark. People wouldn't understand." He reached for her hand. "I don't care what they think." She looked at him sadly. "But I do." Weeks passed. The house felt empty again. Ethan asked about her every night. "When's Auntie Claire coming back?" Mark didn't have an answer. He tried calling, but Claire never picked up. She'd taken a teaching job in Montreal, trying to escape the whispers and her own heart. One night, Ethan fell sick with a high fever. Mark rushed him to the hospital, pacing in panic. Alone in the sterile hallway, he realized how much he needed her, not just for Ethan, but for himself. Without thinking, he called her. "Claire, please, I need you." She arrived the next morning, eyes tired but full of worry. "How is he?" she asked breathlessly. "Stable," Mark said. "They said it was just a viral infection." When Ethan opened his eyes and saw her, his face lit up. "Auntie Claire!" She hugged him tightly, tears slipping silently down her face. Later, in the hospital cafeteria, Mark finally spoke. "I was lost after Laura. Then you showed up, and you saved me." Claire shook her head. "You saved yourself, Mark. I just stood by you." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Then keep standing by me." Months later, under a summer sky in Vancouver, Mark and Claire stood in the backyard watching Ethan chase bubbles. It wasn't a grand love story. It was one built on loss, healing, and quiet strength. "Do you ever think she'd approve?" Claire asked softly. Mark looked toward the sky. "I think she's smiling right now," he said. "Because we finally found peace." Claire leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. As laughter filled the air once again, Mark whispered, "Sometimes the heart breaks, so it can let more love in." And in that moment, surrounded by sunlight, laughter, and the ghosts of yesterday, forgiveness finally turned into forever.